Thank you so much for joining us for Wellways Homelessness Week event. You can ask that. Welcome everybody. My name's Rosalie Frankish. I'm the Housing Programs Coordinator at Wellways Australia. And firstly, and most importantly, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which we're meeting on today. So for myself, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and those of which of the lands that you are on today. I know we're all on varied lands and waters. Importantly, I'd also like to acknowledge that for the issue we are speaking about today, homelessness for the Aboriginal population is far overrepresented, and we at Wellways are committed to working to overcome that issue. And I'd also really like to acknowledge anybody who's attending this webinar who has experienced homelessness or who is currently experiencing homelessness, and we are so honoured to have you here. So we're also honoured to have our panellists, so I'd love to introduce them. So we have our lived experience experts who are on this panel, which are Ben, Clark and Cami. So Cami is a very important member of our panel. Thank you, Ben. Ben's beautiful dog, Cami, and Hayley Bowman, who's our specialist housing worker. Today, it's Homelessness Week, as I'm sure you're all aware, and we want to provide an opportunity for people who are the experts in this field to be able to dispel some of the myths that exist around homelessness. So we want to be able to create a platform where we can ask that. All of the things that you may be thinking about homelessness or want to know more about homelessness, we created this space to ask those questions, and so we can build greater community understanding about homelessness. I'm going to hand over to Hayley now, who's going to lead our Q&A. Thanks so much, Hayley.
No worries. Thanks, Rosie. But I'm going to start with Ben. So we had a couple of questions, or quite a number of questions, around some of the causes and some of the reasons about how people become homeless. So the questions are, like, at what point did it become apparent to you that you had no other option or help but to become homeless? Was there any ready, accessible help? What contributed to you becoming homeless? So are you able to kind of speak to that for us, Ben?
Yeah, easily. Well, it became apparent to me when I was living by myself, and the affordability of living, such as bills, rent, everything like that, become just too much. The obvious part of becoming homeless is the lack of support around me. I never had family. I never had anything like that, people to fall back on, that support network. I was working for myself at the time. I was living pretty well. I was doing everything pretty well, but at the time, everything just fell one thing after another. Bad relationship, everything, lost all my money, lost everything, and had nobody to fall back on. Was unable to work due to having nowhere to live, nowhere to keep my things, nowhere to, my dog as well that I rescued. Having a lack of everything in my life, I was never going to give my dog up just for the matter of, the only thing in my life, the only love of my life that I had that could support me and actually give me smiles. And in saying that, the main reason that I knew that I'd become homeless is because I had nobody around me that could actually support me. And even when I lost all my work, going on to Centrelink, there was a 3-month wait to go onto Centrelink to receive any kind of support whatsoever. Not knowing any of the places I could reach out to that could have possibly helped me at the time. Just not having that, applying for houses, cheaper housing than that, which cheaper housing really doesn't exist. You know, nobody wanted to rent a house to me, so I had no other choice. It's not something anybody chooses to do. It was something that just happens.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. I think you really kind of covered some of the systemic issues there around, like particularly the issues with Centrelink, and like that can be a huge barrier for people as well. Thank you. So it kind of leads into our next question, and I'm going to ask this to Ben and Rosie, but I'll start with Ben, Rosie. And it's around the barriers to obtaining a home, which you've kind of touched on already, Ben. But what's the biggest barrier to finding sustainable housing?
I would say history, the amount of people going for housing as well, being a single male. I mean, being male doesn't really come into it, but just being single, not having a job at that stage, just not having everything else that everybody else, you know, the competition around going for a rental place is so great. You know, for me, I'm bottom of the list kind of thing. So the idea of getting a place and getting one that's close to affordable at the time is just, you know, you can understand that you're going to be bottom of the list compared to, you know, a couple that's both working, both have everything going on. You know, it's not like that. I was just bottom of the list, I guess. Yeah, plain and simple.
Rosie, what are your thoughts around that question?
I mean, I just want to, you know, I really appreciate what you've said, Ben, and, you know, it is heartbreaking to feel as though you're bottom of the list. So I want to acknowledge that. But I think I also want to highlight that, you know, we have a classed housing system in our community. So we have a privatised housing system and then a social housing system. And I think the barriers for people on a low income to be able to access housing is that they are priced out of that privatised market. And then, you know, there is simply not enough social affordable housing for people who are on a low income to be able to access it as quickly as they need to. So some of the barriers for people to actually access any housing and the mainstream housing market is things like income that Ben's talked about, is supports, is things like having a history, a rental history, housing history, having proof of income history. So all of these things, even if you've been homeless, for example, even identification to be able to apply for housing is a huge barrier. So there's some of the things to actually access housing initially, but I think there's the other point about being able to sustain housing or sustain a home. And I think your point, Ben, around support is so important in that area. And I know Nikki's also touched on that as well. You know, being able to actually have good supports around you to be able to help you if you fall behind in your rent or if you have a dip in your mental health or whatever it might be. And that's not just for people who are homeless. You know, I think we can all identify, well, myself personally, of the challenges that can be experienced through mental health. And if you don't have support, it's very, very challenging.
The next question is around responding to people who are sleeping rough at the minute. And I'm going to put this to Ben, if that's okay. So we've had quite a number of questions about how people can respond to people who are sleeping rough at the minute. Some of them have been particularly around people who are begging at the minute. And I suppose the question is, what can people do to be more inclusive in their response to people who are experiencing rough sleeping at the minute?
Well, for me, I could honestly say maybe just sit down and have a chat to these people, you know, like understand them. Don't fear them as an unknown in society, because that's exactly the stigma. You know, it's everybody feels as though a homeless person is dangerous, it's scary, is everything else. And from my experience, some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life, some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life are homeless people. And the reason that they are there is from lack of family, lack of support, lack of people in their lives that actually care, that really, you know, that can be there. And if you sit down and speak to these people and just take 5 minutes out of your time, you know, like break that loneliness for them, because loneliness is the torture most painful, you know, like it is. When you're alone, when you've got nothing apart from your own mind, you're stuck in your own mind, and all you're seeing is people walking past, judging you, thinking that you're the worst of the worst of the worst because you're there. But I guarantee you, if you stopped and spoke to some of these people, you'd see that they've got the biggest hearts, that they've got, you know, like, sure, there's bad in society, but there's bad in every level of society. And to just put that one, you know, that one group and stereotype them and say that everybody out on the streets is there because of a drug problem at their own doing, their own, you know, their own whatever, is just furthest from the truth. You know, it is just not there. You'll find that most of them are there because of a lack of support. You know, even like Anna was saying, that, you know, they're there because they've got no option. They've got no option about returning to a house. You know, nobody chooses that. If you spend a night out on the streets, I'll tell you right now that you do not choose that. That's not how you want to live your life. That's not. You prefer to be a big part of society. You know, you prefer to walk down the street and people say, "Hi, how are you? You know, how you going?" and accept you into their society. But you know, people think lockdown is hard. Then lockdown is every day of the week, every day of the year, every hour, every minute. Days feel like months, you know, being out on the street. And that is lockdown permanently, because everybody social distances from you, everybody stays away from you, everybody, you know, pushes you away. Nobody wants to know anything about you. And all you want is somebody to sometimes just give you a hug and say, "Hey, everything's going to be okay. Everything's all right. We acknowledge you. We know you're there." But yeah, I mean, that's basically it, I guess.
Yeah. You actually, when we had a conversation the other day, you mentioned how when you first got Cami, that you would take her out and sit down with people. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, I was actually living in a house at that stage in Bronia. And when I first got her, she was so damaged. She was really badly abused. A butterfly would land next to her and she would be scared. You know, she would dive behind me. If I left the room, she'd cry. And for me, I just wanted to get her out there and, you know, to try and socialise her with people and just get her to be a lot better. And that's from my perspective. But like a way of doing that is I started going into the city and sitting down with homeless people and just having a chat with them, and you know, just exposing my dog Cami to people. So she was, you know, becoming a bit more social and accepting, and you know, not so scared of everything. And I sat down and speak to them, and like I said earlier, that was some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. You know, like they would offer me their last dollar in their pocket, saying, "Have you eaten today? Have you done this? Have you done that?" And they would be trying to give me money and do that stuff. And, you know, they'd be asking me about my life and my story and things like that. Whereas it was so selfless, you know, there was the people out there, they are, I mean, that's another reason. A lot of them don't have support, and they are so selfless, they are so giving that they give everything to the wrong people, and they end up out on the streets because they've got nothing left. And taking Cami out was really an inspiration for me to be, you know, my admiration for people like Hayley, people like Rosie, you know, I couldn't speak highly enough of these people that do what they do, because it is a selfless thing, and it is it's what's needed. You know, a lot of the time it is just a conversation. It is just asking somebody how they're going, not just walking past or turning your head the other way. You know, like, find out something, learn something about a person. You know,
Yeah.
that's what society is about.
Building on that kind of response there, Rosie, I want to ask you, there've been a number of questions about increasing education and awareness about homelessness. So what are some of the strategies that may help educate people and bring awareness to the issue of homelessness?
Well, I think if I can be as bold as to piggyback off the experts here and what Ben's just said, it's talking to people and talking to people who have experienced homelessness, who are currently experiencing homelessness. That is the best way to educate yourself and the community, both around how people may find themselves in this situation, but also anything that we can do to reduce people experiencing homelessness. I think the other thing is not just to speak to people, but also invite them into important conversations. So conversations such as these, when we are, when there are policy decisions or program design decisions, or even outside of the homelessness system and health-based system, any system, we know that anybody can be homeless. This doesn't discriminate. This needs to be, we need lived experience experts to be influencing all of our systems at policy levels, program levels, operational levels. So I think that is another important thing that I would say in raising awareness. I think as well, to Ben's point, it's also talking with people, firstly with lived experience, but also when you're in conversations in your circles or networks, actually trying to demystify some of the myths that may exist within the community around homelessness. And these points before that you raised, Ben, about, this assumption that people who are homeless because they choose to be, or because they're using drugs, or because they don't want to have a home, or they don't want to work. All of these assumptions that are made in the community around homelessness need to be demystified. And the best thing, one thing that we can do is to actually, in our conversations with our networks, actually set these myths straight, really just explore with people what the actual reasons for homelessness are.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. Did you want to add something there?
Oh, I'm just thinking also about, Ben made a really important point before about your experience of homelessness, Ben, and finding yourself there and that lack of support. And you also made a point about knowing about services and knowing what things were out there to support you. And I think this is really important. It comes to me all the time that people, when they first became homeless, didn't know what they could access and didn't know where to go for help. And that's really not good enough. We need to do more as a service system and community to ensure that people can actually get that information quickly around what they need and what's available to them, so we can intervene as early as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rosie. Our next question is about keeping the hope. So I'm going to ask you this one, Ben. What moments during your experience of homelessness gave you hope?
Well, number one that I've touched on, I guess, is definitely my dog, Cammy. I'd look at her every day and I knew that I had to do something for her, she's the most important thing in my life. She's the one thing that's stuck by me my entire life. People go, but she's just a dog, but she's not. She's way more than that. She come to me at a time where she needed me, I guess. She was very broken, she was very damaged, and then tables turned and I become the one that was very broken and very damaged, and she was my rock. She supported me. So the thing that gave me hope the most was just knowing that I have to move forward, I have to stay positive, I have to, like dogs are very intuitive, sorry. Like they look at you, and if you're depressed, if you're sad, they know it. And a dog like Cammy, she sees that and she becomes very sad and depressed, which would depress me more, seeing that and knowing that I'm the one making her depressed would. So I always had to put on a brave face and have that hope and just, like keep that positive mind and know that I've got to move forward. The next massive part of hope, which I cannot speak highly enough, was Wellways. A lady named Jacinta, who was my worker at the time, and she's a beautiful person, like biggest heart, biggest inspiration. She was there for me, like she would call me up to make sure I was okay. She would come and have a coffee with me. I touched on something earlier about Centrelink. I actually got called into Centrelink to have a meeting with a psychiatrist, which was a horrible sort of meeting. The way I was made feel throughout that. But Jacinta offered to come along with me and sat beside me the whole way, and even spent the next hour after the meeting with me, just listening to me, just talking to me about how I feel, and just listening to more of my story and more of me. And I say when I left that, I was probably at the lowest point in my life when I left that meeting. That knocked me around so greatly. So like I felt like I was nothing. I didn't even feel like I was a bit of dirt under somebody's shoe, like that's how low I felt. But Jacinta staying with me for that hour or however long it was took me from that position to actually having hope and being happy again, feeling that somebody cares, somebody listens, somebody, I'm not in this just by myself. I'm not, there is good people out there that actually see you for who you are and not where you're at, and that's hope. That's all there is to it, hope is what people give you, I guess,
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. That was that was a brilliant answer. And it kind of leads into the next one as well. But there were a couple of questions around, people were asking about what's the best way to support someone to secure and sustain a home. So there were, what's the most important thing a service can do when helping address homelessness? And another question was, how can we help you? What would you like us to do to assist you to find a home? So is there anything you can kind of speak to there, Ben? Like, what's the best way people can support people?
Well, for me now, I've been put into temporary housing for 18 months, which is fantastic. The support for people is just keep trying, we understand when you're homeless, you understand that miracles don't always happen, like you're not always going to be put into a house straight away. For me, the last time I was homeless was for 6 years, and it took that long. But like I said, with people like Jacinta, it was important to get into a house for me, but the support around that was way more important, like just being noticed, being somebody mattered. To get people into a house, we just need more affordable housing. We need it to be possible. We need a real estate agent or something that's set up that understands that not everybody's going to be working, especially through these hard times of COVID, how much is homelessness going to go up by the end of COVID? Is it going to be massive? Is it going to triple? Is it going to quadruple? Who knows? Can we really put a number on that? So we really need something set up for more affordable housing, more easier ways to get into a house, to be able to secure places. I know on commission housing, there's a 10-year wait, 10 years. People may have to be on the streets for 10 years before they can have a secure house for their life. Is that fair? Is that just because they have no support in their life, just because they have nobody around that can actually help them. It's ridiculous.
It is. And I think we all agree on that. We're all on the same page on that one. Thank you, Ben. I suppose you kind of touched on COVID here, and we've still got a few minutes before we hand over to Anna. There was a couple of questions that came through kind of almost about the logistics of rough sleeping, and particularly through COVID. So like in terms of where people can go to access showers and food and that kind of thing, and what kind of impact did COVID have for people rough sleeping? Is there anything you can kind of speak to there?
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. It was, I guess, in a way of speaking, not to put any light on COVID at all, but I guess it was kind of the same at the same time, whereas you are alienated anyway, you are social distanced not by choice, just by life. The showering and things like that, there is places put in place for showers. There are places you can go, but they're hard to access all the time, and especially having a pet, having a dog, you can't access these places with a dog. You have to tie your dog up out the front for however long you're in there, which I don't want to do. Like, people steal dogs, people do these things, and if I lost my dog, then at that stage I'd lost everything. I'd lost everything. The thing that did help during the first lockdown, was actually the increase in that, because I'm not eligible, even though I suffer from severe anxiety, depression, other things, I'm not eligible for any kind of, disability payment. I'm still expected to look for work. I'm still expected to do all this thing. Even while I was homeless, I'm still expected to look for work, do all of that. So during the first lockdown, at least one thing happened. I got given more money at the time, so I could afford to eat properly. I could afford to go to a motel if I needed to. I could afford to do these things. I could, and I didn't have to look for jobs throughout, which at the time I knew was an impossibility, because you're stuck in a triangle of going, what do I do first? Do I find a house? Do I find a job? But nobody employs somebody who's got a job, nobody employs somebody that's homeless, because you might not have showered, you might not have clothes, you might not have all these things, and nobody, and how do you get a place when you haven't got a job? So you're stuck in this loop, of trying to figure out what do you do first. The last thing on your mind is relationships or anything, which in society is a big factor, is an important part of feeling worthy of something, so it's, once you're on the bottom, you're on the bottom, and to get off that is the hardest fight you'll ever have in your life. It feels impossible at stages, but with people like Wellways, that sometimes feels a lot less, feels manageable. So yeah, I guess it's the whole side of COVID.
Thank you, Ben, for those thoughtful responses. Really insightful and beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing. So I'd just like to take some time to thank everybody for attending and closing the session. In doing so, I would just really, really like to acknowledge our fantastic panelists, particularly Ben and Cami today, for sharing their invaluable messages and personal stories about homelessness and the importance of having a home. It truly is, your voices are the most important voices that we need to hear to eradicate homelessness. You're the people, you're the important people. So thank you so much. And thank you, Hayley, as well, for asking the questions. Thank you to everybody else. We wouldn't have had a panel to speak to people if it wasn't for you, and we really appreciate your support. And I really hope that some of the messages that you received today resonated and that you're able to take that out into the community. Thank you. I will close the session. And once again, it's been such an honour and privilege to have you all here. Take care.